from a daily ritual standpoint, what does a typical day look like for you? Morning routine, full works. What's a day in the life of Tim Ferriss look like?
It depends on where I'm located. I was, for instance, skiing for January and February, so it looked very much like a day architected around skiing. But I'll give you a few different examples. So here in Austin, it would be, and now it sounds so cliched, but nonetheless, I've been doing this a long time. It was in the 4-Hour Body in 2010. So there you have it. But I'll do cold immersion. So 40 degrees at, say, 3 to 5 minutes. Nothing too incredibly long.
Is that immediately upon waking?
Yeah, waking up, and then I'll feed the dog, have some water.
Yep.
And then cold plunge.
Yep.
And then I'll go directly from that to hot tub for sort of hyperdilation. I find that just helps lower back issues and things along those lines.
How long?
3 minutes. Nothing too crazy. And this is really for state change. It's not for any complex biological cascade that I could list out. It's really for a state change. And I will back up and say that one of the principles I learned from Tony Robbins, and I don't know if the attribution is originally to Tony, but it's something that I've found very, very helpful, which is a progression. The progression is state, story, strategy. So if you are in a, say, low energy state or a negative state, you're going to create a disabling story, right? Or a critical or a cynical story, which will then impact in the sense that you come up with a subpar strategy. So I always start with state, and then you will have a more enabling story, which could just be from releasing some norepinephrine because you're freezing your balls off. Mm-hmm. And that will enable you to have a better strategy, at least for the day.
You've got an equivalent quote, I think. It's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than to think your way into a new way of acting.
Right.
That seems to be pretty parallel. Okay, so we're in the hot tub.
Yeah, hot tub, get out. At that point, I might do a small amount of journaling, something very basic, right? Like 5-minute journals. And the exact morning routine kind of depends on the day. It's not super highly variable, but there is some variation, right? So if I feel like monkey mind is getting the best of me, probably something like journaling, whether it's morning pages or 5-minute journal, is what I'll do.
Shout out Alex Icon.
Yeah, it's very short, or The Artist's Way and morning pages, which are fantastic. And at that point, I will have already identified the night before or the evening before what's in my calendar for that day. And I will say that the daily architecture, just to make a 30,000 foot comment, is less important to me than the weekly architecture. So we can come back to the day, and I could talk about training in, say, Utah, but it's very skiing specific. Like skiing was the one thing that I was focused on. So everything revolved around skiing. Half the day, almost every day. That's it. So all the PT, all the prep, the Stuart McGill big 3 exercises that you're familiar with as well. All of these things.
Hundreds of hours.
Right.
Yeah.
Bead extract and all these things, all optimized for skiing.
Making me less shit at skiing.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And then the second half of the day, for a few hours, were reserved for the most important high leverage business activities, often revolving around, on Mondays and Fridays, for instance, recording. So set days for recording, set times for recording, 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. We can go into the reasons for that. But Tuesday, team calls. I find that weekly architecture for me, and I'm not the only person who does this, there's some very well-known tech CEOs who also do this, is scaffolding that is a little more helpful than having very tight parameters on a daily basis, because you're going to have unexpected events. Although I will say, if you have to reply to a lot of things within 72 hours, then you have broken systems. Like, you should revisit your processes and systems. So if you're getting a lot of interruptions that you need to handle yourself as firefighter, then you have a process or a policy.
That would include Slack, instant things,
anything,
email,
anything. If you're the boss, let's just say, if you are the CEO or a solopreneur, if you're making too many decisions, that is as fatal as making some of the wrong decisions. Too many decisions will also kill you. So I would say that the morning, generally for me, the thread is do not feel rushed for the first hour. If I
And
feel
is
rushed
that-
for the first hour, I'm going to feel rushed for the whole day.
And is that you have related days in which the morning is rushed psychologically, emotionally, somatically to days that suck?
Yeah.
Downstream, it tends
Yeah.
to be a bad day.
Even if from the outside looking in, you're like, hey, you put a lot of points on the scoreboard and you didn't look stressed, but my internal experience was one of being very rushed.
Yeah.
And people might hear this and they have kids and they say, well, must be nice. You know, my 4-year-old's jumping on my solar plexus at 6 a.m. And I would say I can't speak to that experience because I haven't. I mean, someday I hope to be able to speak to that experience. But there are people like Jason Gagnard, who for instance, started Mastermind Talks, who I haven't interacted with in a long time, but he just started waking up earlier. You know, wake up earlier. He does his meditation, a little bit of exercise, and there are workarounds. Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink is a good one to read. So you can find ways around it.
Okay, so we haven't rushed the morning.
Mm-hmm.
You've planned the night before what the calendar, at least for that day, is going to look like. You also have a weekly rhythm and architecture, which I've fallen in love with too, although stumbled upon as opposed to designed in advance. What about when are you writing? When are you training? When are you recording? And why at those times?
Yeah, I would say training is generally going to be pre-lunch or after work, let's just say, before dinner. I like to train before meals, just like right before meals. And writing is not necessarily a daily activity. It probably should be. It might end up being.
I've just seen you finish 5 Bullet Friday.
Yeah, you saw me do 5 Bullet Friday. So I actually do write that myself. That is not ghostwritten. That is something I do. It's the closest I'll ever get to having a diary. So I actually enjoy doing it because I can look back at any week.
Well, I mean, you convinced me. God, I thought, this is so funny. Things that you take for granted about the world, in retrospect, you realize that you were still maybe early on things. So like you with podcasting, it kind of appeared perhaps obvious to you. You probably had an idea that you were a first mover for it. But I knew 4 years ago when I started my newsletter, God, it's the only thing that you own. Tim Ferriss says it's the only thing that you own and it's the most valuable piece of real estate and everything else is mediated by a thing and you can export that CSV and you can move it anywhere else in the world. Oh my God, I'm so late to the party. And now I look back and I go, I'm so glad that I started that 4 years ago. Yeah. And I'm now that guy proselytizing about like, dude, you need to get a lead magnet.
So I know we're bouncing around a little bit and I feel like I'm giving a disappointing answer, but there's a reason for the disappointment. So first thing, actually, just to comment on that, when I started my podcast, many people told me it was too late. They're like, that ship has sailed, man. 2014. So people are always going to tell you you're too late. Now, we could talk about competition and differentiation separately, but the key takeaway for my very disappointing answer to what is my daily routine is that the exact boot up sequence does not matter. What matters is having at least, say, 3 hours in a block of time uninterrupted where you can focus on 1 or 2 of your highest leverage tasks, which have been defined beforehand. And those highest leverage tasks could be the things that make you most uncomfortable on your to-do list, the things that have been punted week to week to week, could also be the things that are most energy in, the things that give you the most in terms of recharge so that can be applied to other things. So that's an unlock. And having uninterrupted blocks of time. That's it. If you can single task for 2 to 3 hours a day, it sounds ridiculous, but you are going to be ahead of 90% of the population.
Because that's how low the bar has been set.
Whatever you need to do that. Just figure it out. If that's at night, if that's first thing in the morning, which it is for a lot of people with kids who I know who are very, very productive. For me, first thing in the morning just is not going to work. So it tends to be after cold plunge, this, that, and the other thing, I'll probably have a very, very light bite to eat. If I'm writing, I will write for 2 to 3 hours and then have a late lunch.
When does busy work come in, if there is any?
Busy work's usually Tuesday.
Right.
So Tuesday.
So you've blocked it off as an entire day.
Yeah. Tuesday is team calls, one-on-ones, looking at one-on-one documents. I have like Tim's weekly briefing, which is a document that's updated with various subheadings, and I can run through those. Email or assigned or shared in various ways, and I'll process through that as needed. But the busy work creeps in here and there. I'm not going to I'm not going to try to
No one's
put on
perfect.
a show,
Yeah.
right? There are things that you need to do that you aren't going to want to do. And I wish I could remember who initially told me this, but they effectively said, that is the work. The fun stuff, doing the interviews, that's the upside of the job you chose. But the actual work that pays for that are all the little things you don't want to do. So just be grateful, because that is what allows you to do the things, at least for me, that I enjoy doing, just having this type of dance.
Increasingly, I'm using a term that I learned while reading a news story, which is the cost of doing business. So I think Facebook got a slap on the wrist with some huge fine for a data breach, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And there was criticism because even though it's a huge amount of money, to them it's half of 1 week of one territory's top line or something like that. Like it wasn't sufficiently big. And that, look, what you can do is you factor in this as the price of doing business. This is just the cost of operating. And I kind of see a lot of those things as like, oh, you want to have conversations with people that interest you on the show. Oh, you want to be able to work flexibly, and you want to earn your own money, and you want to be able to sort of craft a narrative and do the blah, blah, blah. It's like, hey, guess what? These aren't bugs. They're features. Like this is what comes along for the ride.
Yeah.
Like you're going to feel pressure. You're going to have public scrutiny. People are going to criticize you. There's going to be judgment. There's going to be security concern. There's going to be all of these things.
You have judgment on YouTube?
I'm really trying to focus on you, but the moon has just appeared behind you, and it's slowly moving away from you.
I have a big head. You're going to get an eclipse.
Well, it's kind of like two. It's kind of like two nice moon shapes.
Nice.
We'll get back to talking to Tim in 1 minute, but first I need to tell you about Maui Nui venison. Maui Nui delivers the healthiest red meat on the planet directly to your door. First off, the venison sticks are seriously delicious, not gamey at all, and unbelievably convenient to eat. No one accidentally hits their protein goals, and these little puppies will help you throughout the day. If you're traveling, if you're on the road, or if you're just a rushed human like the rest of us, these things will help you to hit your protein goals and ensure that you're getting good quality meat throughout the day. Not only do they provide the most nutrient-dense and high-protein red meat available, they're the only stress-free, 100% wild-harvested red meat on the market. Also, they're actively combating the environmental destruction caused by Maui's axis deer overpopulation, which literally looks like a wildfire from above. So by eating meat, you're actually helping the environment. Get 20% off your first order by going to the link in the show notes below, or heading to mauinuivenison.com/modernwisdom using the code modernwisdom at checkout. That's MAUINUI venison.com/modernwisdom and modern wisdom at checkout.